We gave Putin no excuse to blame this on the West or to blame this on NATO. We made clear that we were not involved. We had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system. I also talked at length with President Zelensky of Ukraine. I told him that no matter what happened in Russia, let me say it again, no matter what happened in Russia, we, the United States, would continue to support Ukraine's defense and its sovereignty and its territorial integrity.
This President Joe Biden earlier today on the events of the weekend, dramatic. Members of the armed mercenary force, the Wagner Group, nearly reaching Moscow, only to abruptly turn around and stand down, with their leader heading into exile in Belarus. It has everyone scrambling to understand what will happen next in Russia and Ukraine. A visibly angry Putin addressed the public just in the last hour, saying the Wagner Group miscalculated. He thanked the military and said that, quote, blackmail attempts to create unrest are doomed to fail, end quote. To be clear, this is a story about a villainous accused war criminal, that would be Vladimir Putin, and a man arguably more villainous, who until their dramatic bust-up this week was basically Putin's military fixer, carrying out brutal acts on the battlefield. Ambassador McFaul, former ambassador to Russia, described them on Saturday as events were unfolding as, quote, two thugs. One of them, the leader of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, released a message today claiming that he did not intend to overthrow the Putin regime. Washington Post adds this reporting, quote, Prigozhin said in his video message that the rebellion, which he refers to as a, quote, march of justice, came after orders that would have resulted in the absorption of Wagner mercenary forces in Ukraine into the conventional military beginning July 1st. One of the biggest questions right now, what does it all mean for the largest land war in Europe since World War II and the biggest foreign policy crisis facing the United States and our allies, with the greatest consequences for democracy there and around the world? To help us answer those questions, joining us live from Kyiv, my colleague Ali Velshi, who is back in Ukraine. Are you in Kyiv, my friend? Did I get that right?
I am, yes.
Okay. Also in Kyiv, our friend Igor Novikov. I have this idea that after this, you two will have a wonderful cocktail together and solve all the world's problems. Ali, you were on your way to the region when I jumped downstairs on Saturday, and I was so excited to hear what you would report when you got there. So first, you tell me what you've learned since arriving.
Well, I think there are a whole lot of layers to this cake, right? What this means, as you said, what Joe Biden talking about what this means to the world and to NATO and the commitment to Ukraine, what it means to Ukraine, that Russia is in some sort of chaos or disarray, and what it means inside Russia. And all of those are independently important. You noted that when Vladimir Putin spoke just a little while ago, he was visibly angry. This is not a guy who normally looks visibly angry on TV. In fact, Joe Biden had said, we were not involved in this. That's a message Putin seems to have gotten. He said they, and he's referring to the Wagner Group and Prigozhin and the armed rebels. He said they wanted Russians to fight each other. They rubbed their hands dreaming of taking revenge for their failures at the front and during the so-called counteroffensive, but they miscalculated. Now, this is where the rubber hits the road. This counteroffensive has in many cases been led by the Wagner Group. They've done some of the harshest fighting and some of the most brutal fighting around Bakhmut and places like that, and he's calling those failures. Wagner Group head Prigozhin has for over a year been saying that the failure of Russia to take Ukraine was based on bad information that was given to Putin, wrong expectations, and military failure. So basically, they're all blaming each other for the fact that Ukraine still remains an independent and free country with the support of the United States and NATO. Ukrainians are looking at this and saying, it's not clear what success looks like here, but there is some advantage to the idea that Russia, their invader, is in chaos. And they have had gains, though small. They have had gains since their counteroffensive, what Putin calls the so-called counteroffensive. Think about 130 square kilometers, not that much. It's about 10 villages and hamlets, little places. But the Ukrainians are moving forward. And the sentiment that I'm reading here is that as Russia remains in disarray, that is advantage Ukraine for the moment.
Because, Igor, I think anyone anywhere understands that an effort going well doesn't result in one of the key military leaders marching on the nation's capital that houses the other. I mean, tell me what the real talk is among Ukrainians and in Zelensky's inner circle about what this means is really going on and the recognition that the war is going not so well for Russia?
Well, Nicole, let me begin by saying that this whole situation is incredibly surreal, and I'm trying not to laugh at it just to begin with, because the address that Putin gave just an hour ago, they teased it as something that would change the course of history, and like literally ended up like, do you remember Donald Trump's address when he was selling like baseball cards or NFTs or something like that? It was very similar in magnitude. So Putin looks shaken, and the whole situation when a convict running a convict army turns against his war criminal president, it reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, only the orcs attacked Mordor for some reason. It's just, for us, it's surreal. We're obviously cheering and rooting for both sides of this argument, but we also have to take into account a few very important issues. First of all, any chaos in Russia risks escalation of atrocities against Ukraine. So Putin will be tempted to distract, the attention from his failures and the rotten system to actually, doing something horrible in Ukraine. Secondly, I already mentioned it a few times today, Prigozhin, who's fallen out of favor, exiled in Belarus, if some of the Wagner forces, the well-trained Wagner forces, join him in Belarus, he becomes a wild card for Putin, with the Kremlin having plausible deniability because of the seeming conflict. So if Prigozhin does something out of Belarus against Ukraine, the NATO, anyone, right? So Putin will pretend to have plausible deniability. So it's chaotic, it's dynamic, the situation. We're definitely monitoring everything closely.
That is interesting, Ali, that even something that's bad for Putin could also end up being bad for Ukraine, and their civilian population has borne the brunt of a lot of this vicious and brutal war. Do you pick that up in your conversations, in your coverage?
Yeah, it comes down to what this means for Putin and his legacy. This is one of the most serious things that's happened to what was the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, and the Russian Federation, in years. It's not just the most serious thing that's happened during Vladimir Putin's reign. Now, when you think about this, when coups fail, sometimes the leader uses that as an opportunity, as Igor was saying, to show how strong they are. And at the moment, the way to do that is to show your strength in Ukraine. Is he going to double down on things? We have reports that the cooling pods at the Zaporizhia power plant have been mined. Can you imagine if they explode those? There are things that can happen that could be escalatory just so that Vladimir Putin can put a stamp on this and say, I'm actually in charge. And then the other message that's important is that Vladimir Putin is the strong man of the world. For all the strongmen and authoritarians and dictators around the world, they've been looking to him. He has got to look weak. Whatever the internal politics of and the machinations of this clown car coup were, this is a guy who had an armed rebellion within 150 miles of 150 kilometers of his nation's capital. What's he going to do about that to look tough? Also, Wagner is prosecuting wars all over Africa on behalf of Russia. So there's a lot of things at play here. The idea that Prigozhin has just gone to his to hide out in Belarus, which, by the way, also doesn't make sense because the Belarusian leader is a puppet of of Vladimir Putin. None of this actually makes sense. We're seeing the tip of the iceberg, and there's a whole lot of stuff going on below that we're not clear on. And so if you're in Ukraine and you're a Ukrainian today, yeah, I think Igor's right. You're cheering for both sides. But there is some danger that you'll feel the fallout of this. Neither Prigozhin nor Putin were going to be good for Russia. That's an important thing. Neither Prigozhin nor Putin were going to be good for the democratic opposition in Russia. So we still have to see how this all plays out. You saw an angry Putin today. We don't know what an angry Putin does.